when I started working with my nervous system, I started to get traction. The nervous system is a learning technology. It wants to learn, it wants to grow, it wants to evolve, it wants to adapt. So, what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and that gut feeling is actually our nervous system, physics says, making sense of our outer world so we can make those adaptations. When I look at the nervous system, it's that 95% of the autonomic nervous system that's really controlling the show. And when we have experiences that we process, we integrate, we adapt from, the nervous system actually goes through neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, and actually develops programs to function so you can deliver that action, that behavior.
Thanks so much for joining me on the Mark Divine Show. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, Mark. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad we worked through the little tech hurdles there. It seems like every third show I've got to deal with something like that, right?
Is it okay? That's
the
good
world
to
we
know.
live in.
Awesome.
It's funny because what's interesting about this world to me is technology is like, it's so overwhelming, and everyone's thinking that technology is going to like solve a lot of problems, and it will. There's a lot of things that can be solved, I think, with AI and whatnot, but everyone seems to also be rushing toward this idea that it's going to be technology that's going to transform humans back into perfect health and to live 200 and some odd years. And my perspective is that humans have been doing that for as long as time memorial. It's just, we've kind of forgotten.
Absolutely.
Or that information is being deliberately kind of like sidelined or obscured because there's no money in it when you tell people that they can live for a very long time with technology that exists within them.
Yeah,
right?
The economics of the technology, the greatest technology lives within people, isn't so great.
The economics, right? It's a circular economy within the individual. That's
Totally.
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, before we get into like the crux of your work and your passions, where are you from? Like what's kind of the origin, the background story for Sukhi here? Or Sukhi?
Absolutely. So I was raised on the other side of the tracks, and I think you'll appreciate that. And I was kind of raised in a world, Mark, of crime, violence, and addictions. And
in this country?
I'm actually up in Canada.
You're Canadian, okay.
So Vancouver.
What's the name points to Indian, Pakistani? Where's
absolutely. So my family's originally from India. Okay. I was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and we migrated to Vancouver, Canada when I was 3 years old.
Okay, so you spent ponderance of your time up there.
Yeah, so it's the majority of my life up here, Canada, US, a few hours north of Seattle. Mm-hmm. And in life, we always have those choices. And when we take a step back, and I appreciate you saying that, my background and heritage, I have incredibly loving and very Indian parents that did their best to put a roof over our head, clothes on our back, food on the table, which meant they worked long hours in a factory. And my experience is in life, you either get parented or you get parented. And because my parents just weren't around, I typically was immersed into the world around me. And I made a lot of choices that made me go deeper and deeper into that world. And to make a really long story short, it was getting into violence, getting into trouble, getting into addictions, drugs. I started taking drugs when I was like 12 years old.
Wow.
To eventually hitting rock bottom when I was 18 years old. Anxiety, depression, suicide, multiple suicide attempts, a body that was completely failing me, dropped out of school, left home, all these things. I did a lot of things, in terms of trying to help me feel better, try to get better, if you will. Took the meds, what the good docs were saying. Unfortunately, I was using a lot of other recreational substances at the time.
Working all together, huh?
It very much, I've spent professionally the past 24 years in the world of holistic health, healing, and human potential. So really, it's how did I get here? Well, I got here because of a personal journey. And that personal journey was I literally had nowhere else to turn. I didn't want it. I didn't want to sign up for it. And, when you hit rock bottom, it's either you leave or it's only going up. And
Mm-hmm.
so I literally explored everything, Mark. I left no stone unturned. I started getting traction. I started getting my health, my vitality back. I've always been an athlete, quite a high level athlete since I was a kid. And I was always interested in sports and health. Like I was one of those kids in high school. The only thing I would read was like muscle and fitness magazines.
Mm-hmm.
That was me like 13 years old on the wrestling team, on the hockey team. And I would read those, I was in the gym since I was 12 years old. So I always, I was into that scene, if you will. And so when I started getting my life back together, back on track, I eventually got myself into college, university, and I just wanted to study physiology. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
understand
Did you
biology.
have any mentor or like any defining moment that got you out of that kind of dark night of the soul moment of the drugs and the depression, or did you just claw out on your own?
Yeah. So not a mentor, but I had a moment, and it's a fascinating place. And, I've shared my story from different podcasts and stages. It's in my book in the first chapter. So there's no secret about it for the people who do know me. You get to a point in your life, Mark, where more of you wants to leave this world
Mm.
than the part of you that wants to stay. And that was like my lowest moment. And I was in an almost drug overdose state, 18 years old, and I had a safety clip on a gun, which I couldn't figure out, where I literally tried to take my life. And when I pulled that trigger and it didn't click, something profound happened where first I had a massive emotional release and I hit the ground, and more of me wanted to stay than the part of me that wanted to leave. It wasn't a lot, but it was a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result of that, that was my transformational moment.
That's fascinating. I've heard that similar story before where someone actually had to walk up to that line and unfortunately cross it, and it didn't work. And that's when they realized that they didn't really want to die. I wish we could
Yeah.
find a way for them to have that experience without stepping across that line.
Yeah. Trust me, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And I'm 50 years old now, so we're going back 33 years in terms of when that was. Yet it's so fresh in my head because
Mm-hmm.
when you see people, I always say pain's a part of life, but suffering actually for me, it's a bit of a choice.
Suffering's
Um,
optional. I agree.
yeah, it's optional, and I suffered a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
suffered a lot as a kid. I suffered a lot as a teen. And as I started getting traction, one of the things that really influenced and transformed my life was I started working with somebody that started working with my nervous system. And it was a healing process. And when I started working with my nervous system, I started to get traction. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand it.
How
This
did you
person
know you were working with your nervous system? Like, what does that mean?
So this person, so it was like essentially it was like a hands-on. And I mean, when you say like I work with counselors, different practitioners, like out of the box woo-woo healing modalities, like I was game for anything because I
Right.
just felt terrible. And this person who happened to be a chiropractor who worked with the nervous system, but they work with the bioenergetics of the nervous system. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like traditional structural movement of the spine,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. So the contacts were very subtle, but essentially worked with my spine, and I couldn't explain it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like I was like, I have no idea how this is working, and it's working.
Yeah, I have that
Um,
experience with cranial sacral therapy. Like, the guy's
yeah,
barely touching my skull, but I'm feeling energy
exactly.
moving. It's like
Completely.
pretty
So
fascinating.
it's, it was one of those things, but for me and the way I'm built and I operate, long story short, you can talk about that. So, background, I spent about 10 years, 10 and a half years in post-secondary school, background in physiology. I became a chiropractor, but I wanted to understand what this guy was doing. And as a result of that, working with the bioenergetics, understanding the nervous system from that, my world is neurology meets cell biology meets quantum physics. I play
Mm,
around this little
I like that.
triangle here, which
Right.
is kind of unique.
Hmm.
Physics is like my personal passion because for me, kind of just gave me this worldview that made sense. I'm not going to say that physics has it figured out, but for me at least, it just gave me a unique understanding of the world and sort of how it works, and a really great understanding into experiences, which it says are energy that come into our nervous system, which is our perception system. And, professionally, obviously I work with aches, pain, symptom, sickness, disease, a lot of people who are looking for a last resort thing. But very quickly I realized, well, not only can I help people with aches, pain, symptom, sickness, disease, I can actually help people like maximize their health and their life potential,
Right.
which, we both know the ceiling has no limit.
Hmm.
And the piece that I always share with people, Mark, is, the intelligence. We talk about technology and the intelligence that created you, me, everybody on the planet from two cells inside our mother's body in 40 weeks to approximately, some say 50 trillion, some say 100 trillion cells. I'm not sure. I like to say 100 trillion cells. But that intelligence that did that within us, it never abandons us when we're born.
Right.
So my whole journey since I was 18 was kind of like being a gardener. How do I cultivate? How do I nurture that intelligence?
Hmm.
People can call them biohacking, people can call them life hacks. But for me specifically, I always had a deep connection with the bioenergetics of the nervous system. And
Hmm.
that's the thing that I absolutely love. Yes, I believe in all those other things. I believe in nutrition. I believe in mindset. I believe in supplementation. I believe in, finding things at the edge of your comfort zone to completely grow. I'm an athlete, age group, ultra endurance athlete, an 8-time Ironman finisher.
Hmm.
Actually, I just qualified for Kona a couple months ago, so I'll be
Nice.
going there next year. So yeah, I apply these principles in my life, and being an athlete, knowing the adaptations that we have to go through, is that when we can really focus on that healing process, athletes like to call it recovery, but healing has always been a dominant piece in my life. And the thing
Right.
that I invite people to prioritize in their days. For some of us, I listen to a lot of different people, but a lot of different people, I think it could have been you, but I believe you go for like walks on the beach
Of course.
with your
Yeah.
wife.
Hmm.
You be in nature. You have light come in, which activates different receptors in your
Hmm.
eyes and activates your nervous system and allows that intelligence and life force to actually begin moving through your system. You're breathing air. And again, one may say, hey, I'm just going for a walk. And I'm like, oh, you're prioritizing your healing. And that's a beautiful thing in
Right.
terms of doing that. And so for me, so obviously we have a perceptual lens of how we see the world based on our experiences is understanding the foundation of kind of where I was that led into my worldview of the nervous system and our life experience is the nervous system is a learning technology. It
Hmm.
wants to learn, it wants to grow, it wants to evolve, it wants to adapt. The nervous system is also our perception system. So, what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and that gut feeling is actually our nervous system, physics says, making sense of our outer world so we can make those adaptations. And for me, when I look at the nervous system, it's that 95% of the autonomic nervous system that's really controlling the show. And when we have experiences that we process, we integrate, we adapt from, the nervous system actually goes through neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, and actually develops programs
Hmm.
to function so you can deliver that action, that behavior. It's like we don't have to get up in the morning and relearn how to walk, how
Hmm.
to relearn how to brush our teeth, how to relearn how to ride a bicycle, how to drive our vehicle, how to turn our vehicle on. These are all programs like, that stretch of highway when you're driving, you kind of zone out and you're like, oh my goodness, I've arrived home already.
Oh yeah.
It's like
Or
the
missed it.
nervous
Missed
system.
the exit in my case.
Yeah, I missed the exit. It's like it pushes play on that program and the nervous system just runs automatically.
Right.
All the great athletes that move into flow state, that's essentially what they've done is they develop such robust neurological networks to perform those actions that they don't have to burn matches.
Becomes part of their subconscious
cortex,
programming,
right?
pattern
And they
recognition.
essentially do that. And that's a beautiful thing with the nervous system. Now, the flip side of that is when the nervous system doesn't learn, doesn't process, it will hold on to the biology of that experience within parts of the autonomic nervous system. So it's almost like a PTSD type thing. And we know this because then that creates a perceptual lens. People who, let's say somebody starts a business and it goes bankrupt. They start another business, it goes bankrupt. They do it 2 or 3 times and they're like, I don't start businesses because I go bankrupt. Or they're on their 3rd marriage. They're like, yeah, I'm not getting married because relationships and marriage, they don't work for me. Right away, they're creating a biological environment because that experience hasn't fully processed and integrated, meaning the nervous system hasn't fully adapted and grown.
People generally either have like a objective or subjective view of reality, materialistic or a spiritual view. Most people in medical profession think that the mind is really kind of the result of pattern recognition, and the synaptic and neurochemical activity of the brain creates consciousness, creates mind. I have the view that consciousness streaming through these body mind machines, interacting with matter, with the biological intelligence of the body, which has created this nervous system, which includes the brain and the enteric nervous system and the central nervous system and biome, the gut mind and the heart mind and all that, integrated into what we call whole mind. So consciousness streaming through this physical body is what creates the experience of mind. 2 very, very different perspectives. One actually is in alignment with your Indian culture. The other is in alignment with Western scientific materialistic culture. Where do you stand on this kind of split?
The Indian me comes through.
Yeah, myself as well.
Absolutely, 100%. It is like there is this energy, this life force, this intelligence that animates us. And in different ways, I've utilized sort of deductive thinking in my early years to come to that conclusion too, because if there's an intangible energy moving through this system, it's actually animated. And one of the things I always say, Mark, is all the masters of killing actually understood this. Like the English, they would hang people. Why? Because if you disconnect that energy going from brain to body, they're gone. The French, the guillotine.
Well, it's also the enlivening comes not only through the light energy, but through the energy of the breath.
Yes.
So that's the first proof of that kind of subjective view that consciousness is flowing through us. Is remove the breath, then you remove the consciousness.
100%.
Very quickly.
Very quickly. And I know like one of the big things that I'm a part of is getting the nervous system into that coherence, and breath is the first thing. I mean,
that's right.
It sounds crazy.
It's amazing. It's what we start with Unbeatable Mind, and it's what the yogis start with.
Okay. Well, there you go. Because it's crazy because now that I know that, like you probably know, most people, they don't know how to breathe.
Right.
It's just like, well, what do you mean?
In fact, you could make the claim, and I'm sure this is why you start there, is that the reason that most people's nervous systems are completely out of whack, or they've gone into that state of like permanent hyperarousal because their parasympathetic nervous pathway is in atrophy because they haven't been breathing effectively for a very long time.
Yes.
They're breathing through their mouth. They're breathing very rapidly, 17, 20 something breaths per minute. And that's constantly triggering that sympathetic pathway, which means the parasympathetic one kind of goes dormant, gets frozen shut. There's some research recently came out about that. I thought that was fascinating. So
And
we
what
got to
I
open up that parasympathetic pathway through the breath
we
again.
have to open it up. And then what happens though too, that I believe in working with so many people, is that that sympathetic pathway, because it's firing that way, actually wires that way and becomes more robust.
Right.
So that has a
It's
tendency
the dominant
to
go-to,
become
right?
dominant, which is like, cortisol,
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine.
Right. And
And
that
it's,
new normal then becomes normalized. And we tend to manage it with, unhealthy stress management tools such as alcohol and caffeine and hardcore exercise.
yeah,
Been there, done that. And then you don't recognize it. You just kind of feel like, oh, I need a little pick me up. And that
yeah,
reinforces the whole cycle. And it's this vicious cycle that keeps you in a state of hyperarousal, which over time severely degrades your physical well-being as well as your moods and your mental functioning, I think. And that's why
100%.
people come to you, because they've been in this sorry state for years and they don't
One cup of
understand it.
coffee is not enough. One glass of wine is not enough to feel good. It's like, I'm going
Right.
to go for half a bottle. And, it's fascinating because I spent some time in India, Mark, living up there. And when I was in the north and, it was an area more, let's call them yogi, sage-like people, it was really interesting to see their lifestyle in that when they knew, I call it processing. It's like, life's a little overwhelming, stressful. I'm processing a lot right now. That's the terminology I like to use.
Mm-hmm.
They would take a step back from life. They would turn off from life. It's
Right.
like they prioritized rest. They prioritized healing. And in our Western world, it doesn't
Yeah, we have
happen.
a massive bias for action. Most people are afraid of just stopping everything. They think everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And the
Like just,
reality is it recovers, right? It restores.
yeah.
And even like when it comes to the doing part, like of your business or whatever, I mean, unless it's exam week in school, taking a little time off to restore and to reflect leads to greater insights and greater
Yes.
synthesis, right? Again, there's research on that now that says even at a micro level, if we don't take time to restore after every kind of period of deep work, or after a meeting, or like after this podcast,
Yeah.
we should take 5 minutes to just stop and just breathe deeply through our nose calmly, to let the brain do that kind of micro integration in the nervous system to allow that synthesis.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's all packed into your sleep. And if your sleep is disrupted with cortisol, sugar, alcohol, then you never give your body mind time to fully integrate from the day's learning and stress. And that kind
And
of
that's
compounds that sympathetic
yeah.
response we're talking about.
And that's the word that I use, Mark, is integrate.
Right.
So we have to integrate. When we integrate the nervous system, it gets the opportunity to adapt, which
Right.
is learning and growth. And I always say the greatest growth occurs right at the edge of our comfort zone.
Right.
That's what sort of allows that bandwidth. Any people that have created great feats in life is they have a bigger capacity.
Mm-hmm.
They've cultivated their capacity and bandwidth to be able to do that, whereas others have maybe taken a step back and retreated from that.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's where it begins. I believe the healing process is, how do we get our nervous system into what you said, more parasympathetic, which is
Right.
more coherence, which is where cells, tissues, and organs start to reorganize and regenerate with better shape, better structure, better
Mm-hmm.
function. The same way our hair grows, our nails grow, our skin sheds.
Right.
Every cell within our body has a life cycle that constantly turns over. And the more coherence, parasympathetic tone we essentially keep trading in this, I call this mind-body vehicle that allows us to
Yeah, I
experience
love
life.
that. Trade it in. Yeah, you're constantly rejuvenating it. I've used that same metaphor. Like, if you buy a 65 Corvette and you just leave it sitting around, 40, 50 years, it's going to be a rust bucket. But if you just,
Yeah.
If you polish it every day and, tweak it here and tweak it there, you see some of these unbelievable vehicles. They're like brand new. Your body's just like that.
It's amazing.
So you've used the term neural activation and neural coherence. Can you describe what those are? And like, is it a practice, or like, what are you doing with those things?
Yeah. So very quickly, one-on-one nervous system, when we measure its firing, and I know you know this, different wavelengths, beta,
Mm-hmm.
alpha, and theta, and different wavelengths where the spike and the trough are equal.
Mm-hmm.
It moves in an equal, almost like a sine or a
Mm-hmm.
cosine wave.
Mm-hmm.
That's called coherence.
Mm-hmm.
And when the nervous system's in coherence, it's in that parasympathetic. On the flip side, if you look at heart rate or HRV, your QRS wave, there's an absence of coherence. You want your heart to do that, but you don't want your nervous system to do that for a long period of time. When you're
Mm-hmm.
activated, absolutely, you're getting ready to present this and that. There
Mm-hmm.
can be that a little bit of that sympathetic that's going to allow you to perform.
Right.
But to live in that, you don't want that. So in moving the nervous system to more and more coherence, again, it's almost like this deep meditative process. And this deep meditative process starts with your breath. You turn your internal dialogue inwards, focusing on what's going in here. And by getting into these deeper meditative states, allowing your system to do that, allows your nervous system to move into coherence, which my lens of it is when you look at the energy centers, there's different languages for them. Some people can call them chakras. Some people can call them neurological centers. That's what I call them. I refer to them like heart plexus, adrenal plexus, lower superior, inferior mesenteric plexus. It's about allowing those little mini brains within the autonomic nervous system to develop more coherence and to begin communicating with each other in more and more coherence.
Got it.
So
So,
over
so
the
is that
years,
neuroactivation as well, or is that a different thing?
so neural activation is slightly different, but it's aligned to it where now you can activate the nervous system, because what I said was the nervous system, if you haven't integrated and processed something from the past at a low grade level, it's still living in that physiology in this moment. And when those really start to build up, that creates incoherence.
Right.
And the thing that my journey has taught me is that the nervous system actually doesn't know the difference between past, between present, and
Right.
between future.
Right.
Where your attention goes, your energy and life force flows.
Mm-hmm.
So the activation piece is, people talk about visualization. I think visualization is great. And then I said to myself, well, but visualization is only one piece of our sensory system. What if I could activate my entire nervous system to have a full sensory experience of what I'd like to create? See it, hear it, smell it, taste it, have a full sensory experience. The nervous system is thinking this is actually happening,
Mm-hmm.
and actually starts to wire and fire that way. And as a result of that, it's sort of, neural activation is my way of saying how we consciously create our life moving forward from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we can do is we can insert different things within our nervous system to have that full sensory experience. So I'd say moving the system into neural coherence is more healing. Moving the system into neural activation is more creating. They
Mm-hmm.
can be done separately or they could be done together. My experience is in working with people, really all I've kind of done is I've moved people from one identity to a new identity, an
Mm-hmm.
identity that has more health, more vitality, more awareness, more purpose. And it's about allowing that perceptual lens just so we can move that way with more grace, flow, and efficiency.
Right.
Doesn't mean there's not challenges. Doesn't mean there's not curveballs. It just means that we can actually leverage this beautiful technology within us to begin creating that even more.
You're a human potential guy. What do you think about longevity? City powers of yogis and ninjas
Yeah.
running up walls and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, on a personal level, I love that stuff. Like I really do.
Yeah, I
Like it's,
studied Aikido for a number of years, and the founder of Aikido, Ueshiba, was famous for challenging in his latter years of his life. He had a challenge that, anyone could try to shoot him. And he would, this happened several times. Three people would line up and he was like 20 yards down, on the other end of the studio or wherever they were.
Yeah.
And they would say, okay, go. And then before the first shot was fired, he was behind the shooter and had disarmed him. And slow motion footage of this showed him like exploding off his seat and like running with these really quick little steps,
like through the air,
almost through the air. Yeah. And disarming this guy, but you couldn't see it with the naked eye. So it's like that was a human being doing that. I watched my grandmaster martial artist break 5 blocks of ice. Each block of ice was probably like 8 inches thick with tiny little pieces of wood in between to prop him up with his head.
Right.
And his grandmaster was renowned. A guy named Masayama was renowned for chopping off the horn of a charging bull with his hand. Most people think that's just fantasy, but I look at that as just human potential. You focus on something long enough with the intention to develop a certain power,
right? Man,
you can pretty much do extraordinary things. Now we're seeing that with crazy parkour and gymnastics and CrossFit. And, I think we're just getting warmed up. So anyways, I'm more curious about your perspectives on longevity and like optimal health. Can we maintain a disease-free body forever with these technologies and with our mind?
Going back to the human potential piece, I believe that there's no limitations of matter. There are only limitations of consciousness.
Right.
And to me, consciousness
has no limitations. It's your contracted experience of consciousness that is limited.
Yes. Consciousness also has no limitations, but it's relative to every human being.
It's relative to your body, mind, machine. Yeah.
Exactly. So the other piece that I'll share is, being in a world where, lots of people I've worked with have symptoms, sickness, disease, illness, and I see the transformation in these people and who they've become as a result of that. It's taken me back, Mark, to a place where I'm like, we kind of don't know what each person's journey is. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's easy to say when I see somebody inflamed, overweight, not taking care of themselves, and they end up in a symptom, sickness, disease state. But what happens when we have a healthy, vitalized, dialed in human being that is now presenting with symptoms, sickness, disease? Because I've seen that a lot as well. So it started to make me scratch my head. If you asked me this question a decade ago, I would be like, well, as long as you're doing X, Y, and Z, you're immune to it. Yeah. I don't say that anymore.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I think karma has a big play in it.
It does.
Your evolution. And also I think it's extraordinarily, the practice of constantly rejuvenating your body requires extreme discipline and very little contact with other humans, because the vast majority of humans are pretty negative. And so you can't allow any negativity in. You have to be constantly bringing more consciousness into the body than is bled off on a day-to-day basis.
Well, yeah, it's like people say, do you watch what you eat? And I say, well, yes. And I watch what I put in my eyes, what I put in my ears, right, what I feel. Like essentially that statement, I am conscious of my entire sensory experience. Like I don't watch horror movies. I don't watch the news. Well, I don't watch TV, but it's like, because I'm aware of how that can influence my entire perceptual lens and my physiology. So, when you say that, and you said it, whether it's karma, whether it's that soul, that being's journey, is that I believe we're here to grow, evolve, and actually expand our own personal consciousness. And regardless of how healthy or dialed in your lifestyle is, it may be that one little niggly, that ache, that pain, that little curveball that is the next step in your evolution.
Right. And that's the pivot point, or that's the next challenge that you need to overcome.
It's the next challenge, because like we don't grow without challenge.
Right.
Like we do not. I always say to people, you want a strong, healthy heart? You sit on the couch, be a couch potato, or you go out there and you put a little stress on the heart. You get your sweat on. Same sort of thing, right? Like we only grow through adaptations and growth. And I've had two experiences, 18 and another one a couple years ago, health wise, very challenging. When I was 18, my lifestyle pretty much, it's a pretty simple equation to be like, okay, you live this way, of course that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
What I experienced a couple of years ago, I'm pretty dialed in,
Right. Right. Came out of the
it's
blue.
like, whoa, Suki, you got hit with that, and I'll say I'm a different person as a
Mm-hmm.
result of that health challenge and being on the other side of it. It's 100% behind me. And that was my thing. I hadn't raced Ironman in 8 years and I wanted to go back. It was my goal to go back and race Ironman when I turned 50. I have young daughters. They're 10, 7 years old. And my wife knows, and for me, yes, I train hard, but I also heal and recover hard.
Mm-hmm.
I do my best to find this incredible balance within doing this sort of crazy sport. And for me, it's very much, I'm a little bit of a monk in solitude. And the training allows me to sort of go through that. And for me, it is a big part of my spiritual practice
Right.
in terms of being able to cultivate and nurture that. And it was also this thing where all the docs around me were like, there's no way you're going to be able to race Ironman next year, based on what we're seeing here. And I said, okay, we'll see. So it's also
A challenge there from the
a
outside, right?
challenge, but it wasn't so much a challenge for me and my ego, Mark, which we all have an ego, but it was more of a challenge of this idea of human potential.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe, what one can do, anyone can do. There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
special about each person. Yet, to be like, I believe the intelligence and life force within me is greater than the challenge I just went through. And I believe in my intelligence's ability to adapt and grow. And I believe not only will I get to the start line, I can get to the finish line. I'm going to get there in a fashion where I can get there on the podium.
Yeah. I love it.
Um,
I mean, the challenge, whether it's self-imposed, like a endurance race or our Kokoro camp or Navy SEAL training or Ironman, or it comes to you in the form of a health issue or life crisis. What they do is they expand the vessel. That's my perspective. Like, let's
right.
just imagine that our vessel is like this clay pot and it's kind of small, but then we have this challenge and we have to like endure the crucible of that challenge, and it heats up that pot and it transforms it. And the next thing you know, on the other side, like you've got more consciousness flowing through your pot, your vessel, because you've expanded it. Your aperture is wider. You got your perceptual capabilities are broader. Your perspectives are more expansive. You're more inclusive. Your heart is more open. You're more compassionate. Those are descriptors to define what it feels like to have the
Yeah.
vessel expanded.
Yeah.
That's
And,
cool.
and that's growing as a human being, which ultimately I kind of think that's what we're here to do.
That's right.
I think we're here to grow and
I'm glad you
evolve.
brought that back up, because I have a philosophy around like why we're on this planet. And it sounds to me like you believe that our purpose is to evolve. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes.
would agree. And I would say that the only qualifier from my perspective is that we're meant to evolve in a very unique way. And so this is where the other kind of version of purpose comes in, is like a purpose in service, to be doing something in a certain way for a certain population, even if it's
Yeah.
Mother Earth. But really, that's in service to your evolution, right? So overarching big P purpose is to evolve, and then the little p purpose is to evolve in a very unique way that only you can fulfill.
I always say, I've said this from stages and speaking. I said, each of you are unique. No one looks like you. No one walks like you. No one talks like you. You have a unique verse and song to give to this world. And if you don't give to the world, it'll be gone forever.
That's right.
And
It's
I
a
believe,
loss for humanity,
yeah,
and a
complete.
lost opportunity for you too, right?
Yeah,
So, which is a
absolutely.
both and.
Yeah.
Man, one last question. So you made a statement that you believe mindset alone may be incomplete for some people. What does that mean?
What I've observed with people, the people where mindset has really served them
Mm-hmm.
and has really changed the trajectory of their life, has allowed them to create that new identity within themselves,
Mm-hmm.
biologically, neurologically. For certain people, I've seen that hasn't happened. And here's what I notice is the difference. For example, one of the things can be is, people are trying to become more abundant, if you will.
Yeah.
And they say they do their 10-step thing, let's call it the Tony Robbins, the 10-step, I'm abundant, I have money, et cetera, money's flowing to me. And then they get a parking ticket that afternoon for $20, and they pretty much the next 4 hours of their life.
Yeah, it triggers them back into that sympathetic,
exactly.
and then it wrecks all the vibrational quality of that positive affirmation.
Exactly.
Totally, I get it.
So it's not that, like, sometimes people say, well, he doesn't believe in mindset. I'm like, I 100% believe in mindset, but for some people, they might have to do more. So for that person that's getting stressed out over that ticket, they need to embody the emotional resonance. I believe the language of the autonomic nervous system is emotions, which is energy and motion for me. So using mindset to start, but ultimately getting that 95% of their autonomic nervous system and that sensory experience and activating it so they're in the emotion of what their mindset is, that's when I believe you're sealing the deal. The people who I've seen that are successful with that, they do that without consciously being aware of it.
Right.
Whereas other people can't sort of get, and you probably have said, people coming to your programs, like, yeah, I tried that mindset stuff. It didn't work for me. And right away I'll go, well, it's probably because the process wasn't complete for you.
Yeah.
That's where I start.
Right.
And then we get into it, and that's kind of what happens with them in terms of that. And so that's how I would answer that.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah. I think, there's a lot of semantics here, and definitions, and words are very limiting. They can only point to the truth. They can't, be the truth. For me, the process of developing the mind is to make the subconscious conscious. So again, it's back to that expansive, right? Expanding the aperture, expanding the mind. So you're cognizing more and you're bringing more. So ultimately all your emotional and sensory perception become cognized, and it's still part of your mind. So it's never not part of your mind. It's just you're just not aware of it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. This has been a really cool conversation, Sukhi. Thank you so much for your time. You got a program called Foundations for Healing. Is that right?
I do have a program. So I have that program, Foundations for Healing. Essentially, it's a 7-week program. It's available online, and it takes people through that process of moving their nervous system into more and more coherence. And at the very least, if anything I shared strikes a chord with you, I have an ebook on my website. You can read that. It's The Healing Power of Your Nervous System.
Awesome.
It's short and sweet, but gives you the goods so you can really get more empowered.
And what's your website?
It's drsukhi.com, DRSUKHI.com.
SUKHI.com. We'll put out in the show notes too, but most people are probably walking or driving or whatever. And there's foundationsforhealing.com.
Foundations for Healing will be at the Dr. Sukhi website.
Oh, it's at the Dr. Sukhi website. Got it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, great work. Keep it up. It's very valuable. And we have so many people are in that state of hyperarousal. If everyone could go through your program, it'd be a better world. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.
Yeah.